Welcome to Health Stealth Radio, where we move away from the mundane to gather insights from the shadows of enterprise and patient cybersecurity. Yes, we surely believe that traditional themes like endpoint software and zero trust are critical, but given massive advances in AI, remote and wearable device hacking, and data hostage negotiators, there's a much darker side to cybersecurity, and not everyone is quite willing to talk about it in public. Health Stealth Radio will thrive on these topics and encourage fireside spats to debate them. Here's your host, Frank Catita.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Frank Catita. I'm the host for Health Stealth Radio, and today this is really an interview that I've hoped for a long time. We have with us today Andrew Carr, who is a professor at Utica University, and he heads up a cybersecurity group there. But the other part of his life and his previous life, and probably part of his current life, is with as a data hostage negotiator. So I'd like to welcome Andrew. And Andrew, could you just give sort of a brief introduction and tell our audience what you do? And you know, I'm more interested. I teach a personal branding course myself. I'm really interested in how a guy gets from point A to point B of going where they were in life to ending up being a data hostage negotiator and to being a professor teaching this at Utica University.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Frank. Really appreciate it. As you mentioned, I'm the director of the graduate programs in cybersecurity at Utica University. I have long ties there. I went to school for both my undergrad and grad work there. I've been teaching in some form there since 2011. But I didn't start off in academia. I actually started off at a regional crime lab as a digital forensic analyst due to my schooling. And then I became a full-time professor, and then I got dragged out in the private sector by a friend of mine. And that's where I ended up in the kind of seedy world you mentioned in ransomware negotiations and incident response investigations and all that. And then I left that in 2022 in order to go back to academia. I do still consult on the side, as you mentioned, so I do still have my fingers into this, but mostly more expert witness stuff at this point.
So this, you know, I lean on the name of data hostage negotiator. I'm sure in the community you have different names for it. I'm sort of curious how mysterious this is in the world that you live in terms of the cybersecurity experts, especially in the healthcare sector, which our audience is almost entirely involved in. Is this something that people know about, they just don't talk about, or is it something that's obviously coming into the fore more than ever for obvious reasons?
Yeah, I mean, it's been around for quite some time. Most of the time, you would see it as an extension of the services offered by an incident response firm. So if you hire somebody to do kind of the investigation, they'd also have a group of individuals that would help with the negotiation, because they would have in-depth understanding of what was going on with the environment, kind of the cadence of recovery, those types of things. There were early on some dedicated firms specifically doing the negotiation piece. But like I said, it was mostly an extension. Now the negotiation firm aspect is coming more into the fore, where they're just doing that. Sometimes they're tied to the actual payment brokers that we use. So we would enlist a payment broker to actually transfer the cryptocurrency to the threat actor. So now some of those firms are bringing on negotiators in-house because it's a lucrative opportunity. But most of the time, it was, you know, your engagement leads. It was the person running the incident response for the client, and they were the most senior person. They were overseeing the other analysts on the team. That's how I got started in it. And you would actually do the negotiation for the particular investigations that your team was working on.
Interesting. So is there an inflection point where people say, you know, we're just not going to be able to solve this with technology? We can't do it on our own, and oh my God, they hold their nose or take a deep breath and say, you know, we're going to have to cough up some dough to get this back. Where do you see that point? Or I imagine it could vary dramatically depending on the nature of the data. But at what point do people say, I just can't do it myself?
Yeah, so it typically happens at one of two places. One, either the remediation and recovery is just simply not going fast enough, and it's just a dollars and cents analysis of, we're going to lose more money here by trying to do this I call it the honest way. What the FBI tells you not to pay. But sometimes that's just going to cost a massive amount of money to forego the payment. Or vice versa, they may identify that something that they need to recover or replace is simply not available. They don't have a backup of it. They don't have access to it, something like that, right? And they realize this is critical data and we need it. The third kind of inflection point is kind of the oh crap moment. I've had a few of these, and it is when so to give a perspective on how the negotiations typically work is we ask for a couple of things from the threat actor. We ask for proof of data exfiltration. So if they've stolen data, prove it to me. And we also ask for proof of decryption. Well, when the proof of exfiltration comes back, sometimes it has information that is quite critical to the client. I do remember a law firm I was negotiating on behalf of. They worked specifically on class action lawsuits. And the file listing that came back of things that the threat actor stole had right in the titles of the files, subject to privilege, do not produce, over and over and over and over again. The moment that law firm saw that they had that data, they said, we don't care what it is, we'll pay it. We won't have a business if this gets out there. So it can happen at a couple of different stages, but those are typically when we essentially move toward settlement.
Interesting. So I just want to rewind just a little bit when you mentioned where the FBI says you don't want to do this. Yet at the same time, I mean, to what extent is there anything from a regulatory point of view or just an ethical point of view where they need to be brought into the loop? I mean, unless, some of these things they're obviously aware of because they get picked up in the press and the healthcare establishment in our case says, oh my God, it happened. We want to make it public. Are you in coordination with them in some of these cases?
Yeah, so it really depends on the sector, the business itself, kind of what they're involved in. Oftentimes, the organization will file an IC3 report and notify the FBI, and that we'll coordinate with them to provide them malicious files or IP addresses or whatever they need. Right, we're not adversarial to the FBI. Obviously, we would love to help their mission. Sometimes the lawyers will, so the Cyber Breach Council, they will kind of run information back and forth between the FBI and us to kind of keep everything, under privilege and make sure we're only giving what is necessary and not exposing the client to any risk. But yeah, we certainly work, hand in hand when they would like information from us. But that's kind of a secondary piece. My role, especially when I transitioned specifically just to doing negotiations, that was my full-time job. I did it all day, every day. My goal is to help provide the best outcome for the client. And sometimes that outcome requires that the client pay a ransom to either recover their data or to suppress the publication of information that was stolen from them. And I certainly understand that there are circumstances where while the federal government, the FBI would not love you to pay, I certainly understand that this is a business, and at the end of the day, people's livelihoods are at stake, and I hold nothing against anyone that makes that decision to move forward.
Sure. So, I mean, the big story in Action News is the Change Healthcare situation that happened. God, it's probably a month and a half ago now. It seems like forever. And the way that this has had such a seismic effect, and really just how it's a distributed effect across so many things that you never really even thought it would affect. What happened in your business and also with the work that you're doing at the university in looking at what happened with Change? What do you see that from? How do you see that from the lens of a negotiator?
So a couple of different things. The first is kind of, I think it pulled back the veil on how large some of these companies are and how intertwined with our daily lives they are. So Change Healthcare, I mean, their systems and information is touching so much of our daily interactions, whether it be prescription drugs or billing or whatever it might be. And people quickly realized how far those tentacles reached. And if Change Healthcare was impacted, the vast impact it could have on our daily lives and our ability to, like I said, get prescription medications or get treatment or even have our healthcare providers pay their staffs. It was, I think it pulled back the veil that, this can have really impactful, consequences for the average individual. It's not just, the C-suite in an organization having to deal with this behind the curtain. Depending upon the size of the organization, it can really have, a significant impact. I mean, look at the Colonial Pipeline hack, right? That shut down, gas on the East Coast. It can be these really immense consequences for a single organization getting hacked.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about it before. I was talking to someone who said that because of the Change Healthcare breach, in a completely different business, they weren't able to cut paper checks for employees or for contractors. So, I mean, you think, how did it get to the point where the technology for cutting checks through a company that does expense processing couldn't do it? So it's the tentacles are amazing. So I'm a little bit curious, and I understand that there's proprietary information here. And I think our audience, and just because we all like to watch mysterious television and podcasts, are curious about the mechanics of how one goes through this negotiation process. So, how do you, first of all, how do you communicate? And obviously everybody talks about cyber currency or cryptocurrency. So I'm sure there's a certain part of that from the payment perspective, but what's the actual negotiation process like? And what are the personalities, the characters that you're negotiating with on the other side? I imagine, that's one of the most fascinating things for me.
Yeah. So I'll try to make this as not long-winded as possible.
That's okay.
I have a whole hour presentation on how to break these down.
We'll bring you back to that. Okay.
Yeah, but so essentially, when we initiate negotiations, most people don't understand it's not like a regular, M&A negotiation where you're, two companies coming together trying to secure the best outcome for themselves, honoring the process and all that. We are already behind the 8 ball. We've already lost. So we're representing the client, essentially trying to claw back as much as we can on their behalf. Now, depending upon the circumstances, that might be something where we make a quick settlement, right? Maybe they need to recoup their operations very, very quickly, and that's what's most important to them. And the monetary loss is not the most significant aspect of it. Think a hospital that's taken down or something like that. Other times we're trying to secure the best possible reduction in the ransom, right? So the way to do that is to essentially draw it out as long as humanly possible so that you can demonstrate to the threat actor that you don't necessarily need their assistance, you don't necessarily need their decryptor, and you are simply doing this to shore up loose ends. So you can do that protracted negotiation for reduction in monetary value. You can do what we call a quick shave, which is that quick, fast-paced one. But during the course of it, we're trying to establish a number of things. Typically, the deliverables, if you pay them, are the suppression of data, a decryption utility, and it's called a security report. That security report is typically mostly generic garbage of, enable two-factor authentication and do whatever, right? But typically the first line is how they got into your organization. They'll tell you if it was a zero-day vulnerability, if it was phishing, if it was whatever.
So they will, that's part of your negotiation is that they will actually tell you.
Yep. Yeah. So not every group, but many of them will tell you, we got in by phishing an employee. They won't tell you who it was, right?
No, but
specific employee.
No, the modality though. Yeah.
Yeah. So they'll tell you how they did it. They will either provide proof of deletion or provide you access to the data. And we're trying to gain insight into the data for data breach notification purposes, right? So sometimes I'm negotiating as if I'm going to pay this threat actor, but really all I'm trying to do is gain as much information as possible to identify the specific files and folders that they stole so my client can data mine them in order to assess their breach notification responsibilities. Sometimes I'm, legitimately trying to secure a deal and we'll go through with it and pay them. But it is very much a process of working hand in hand with the client to understand their needs and then facilitate that through the negotiation. And being a detached third party, I'm not emotionally invested. I can keep it cordial. Most people don't understand that these interactions are typically very professional. We're not sitting there yelling at each other. And frankly, if you do that, it's not going to go well. They have the upper hand and creating kind of poor exchange is not going to benefit you or the client. So yeah, we're acting very polite. We're treating this like a business decision. And most of these are businesses. These ransomware groups operate with an affiliate network. You have a leadership structure at the top that kind of holds the keys to the ransomware and the infrastructure and all that. And then you have affiliates that buy in, conduct the attacks. They will then work through the negotiators to secure a deal, and then the leadership group will launder the money for them. It is a business empire, if you will, at this point.
No, it is. So this might be a very naive question, but I'm assuming all of these communications are done on secure text-driven both lines, or I mean, we live in a world of television where somebody's got a burner phone. I mean, is it all mostly digital communications online?
Yeah, so there's typically three ways that you'll interact with a threat actor in negotiation. One is a encrypted email, the other is a Tor site, and then the last is something like Tox or Telegram or some other encrypted instant messaging communication methodology. So depending upon the group, some prefer email, some prefer the Tor sites. Many of the more established groups prefer the Tor sites because they have this infrastructure already set up.
Sure.
You can provide them files, they can provide back files. The demands will be listed right there when you enter the site. You'll be able to communicate back and forth in chat, and then you can actually facilitate the payment right through there. Some of the other groups, they use Tox or Telegram or whatever it might be, and sometimes you have to contact the leadership of a group directly. I've had to do that with Lockbit, where you have to go to their direct Tox chat and reach out for something specific if there's an issue with the particular affiliate you're negotiating with or whatever it might be.
Interesting. So, I mean, it's interesting how you say that the conversations are professional, which first of all, it's counterintuitive. It can be professional, but I mean, we're talking about criminals. So it gets back to the other part of it of how do you trust a criminal? I mean, same thing with Change Healthcare. We saw that ransom was paid, and the next thing you know, we see the trickling of data coming out. I mean, what does one do to mitigate that part of the problem other than really establishing trust with criminals online to assure that won't happen for your clients?
That's a tough one. Ultimately, I tell every one of my clients, they are criminals, and you really shouldn't trust them. But there is a kind of a mutual benefit to them being trustworthy, if you will. These groups are well established. They brand themselves. They have names, they have infrastructure, and they have a reputation to uphold. If word gets around, we are a very tight-knit, small community. If word gets around that a particular group is re-extorting, if they aren't following through on the deliverables that they promise, we'll let each other know. And then people are much less likely to pay because we'll let the Cyber Breach Council know, we'll let the insurance companies know, and they'll be less likely to release the funds related to that because they know there's an inherent risk. So these groups will go out of their way to ensure that you have I guess they'll call it a good customer experience if you pay them. If you pay them, they'll make sure that you get the decryption utility. They'll even assist you if there are issues deploying it throughout the environment. So while there is a bit of kind of reputational aspect and a bit of trust there from a perspective of they're trying to make sure you don't say bad things, they are ultimately criminals. And there are numerous people involved in these organizations. There's a leadership structure that has that reputation to uphold, but there are buy-in affiliates. Those affiliates may not necessarily have the same respect for that particular group. They may work for multiple groups. And like you saw with Change Healthcare there, essentially the leadership group took the money and ran, left the affiliate high and dry, and their only recourse was to try and threaten them with release of the data. I've had clients in past years who didn't pay a ransom, and then 2 years later they show up on a leak site. So they're holding this for a long time. And I've seen, when we're negotiating, they're showing us file listings, they're showing us proof of exfil. I've seen different storage repositories for the same data. Whether it be, this is localized infrastructure, this is, Mega NZ or some other cloud hosted infrastructure, I know it's in more than one place. So ultimately we can't trust them, but there is this idea of they have a reputation to uphold. So they're not going out of their way to, kind of screw over they call them customers.
So without giving away trade secrets, I mean, are there instances where the ransom has been paid and then you have the leakage and then the client or the insurer comes back and says, I need a make good on this? I mean, how do we What do we do? I mean, in terms of, I'm not talking in terms of the ransom. Obviously, the bad actors aren't going to just say, "Okay, we'll write you a check and give it all back to you." But I'm sure that the people in the profession are making money on being able to mitigate the losses. So if one doesn't mitigate the losses to the customer satisfaction, do they typically come back and say, I just spent $2 million and I didn't get anything in return?
So it's quite unusual for you to get nothing in return.
Okay.
In this day and age, the groups are more kind of business-like, if you will.
Compliant.
Yeah. It's less likely that you're just going to get, up and left there.
Right. Standing at the
But
altar.
there were smaller groups with smaller ransoms years ago. We had a lot of issues with Phobos back in the day, where they would try to re-extort. You'd essentially pay them. They'd give you some of the decryption keys. Then they'd come back asking for more money. And, that type of stuff did happen. There's been accidental postings before. Conti did it a couple of times where you'd pay and there was just kind of a breakdown in the communication structure between the affiliate and the leadership group. And somebody posted the data, not realizing that the ransom had been paid at the last minute. And, those things can happen. It's not usually a common occurrence, but there are sometimes, I call them sobering up posts, where a negotiation isn't going to the threat actor's liking. Maybe it's taking too long. The dollar amounts are not coming up to their kind of their threshold quickly enough. And they may do a sobering up post where they'll post some of the data up on the dark web or the ClearNet, and they'll essentially try and shame you into coming back to the negotiating table in a more serious manner. So that does happen sometimes where some of that information gets out there. And this all really comes down to being a quality advisor for your client. You need to help them understand the process right from the get-go, help them understand the risks, and help them understand some of these processes that they do sometimes happen. It's really intimidating sometimes when the negotiation you're working is being reported on CNN. It's a weird position to be in, and there's a lot of pressure there, but it's a formula. It's something that you can repeat. It's something that you've done many times, and you just have to keep the client aware of the steps that are going to happen and the intimidation tactics they might use, and how you can get past those for the best result. You're not going to come out of this unscathed, but it's just creating the best result with the most risk management that you can.
So you mentioned advising your client. So there's obviously advising your client when they get into this fix, that I'm talking to them about the fact that they're paying ransom. I'm wondering, I know you do a lot of presentations in the area. I'm wondering what you do to advise clients well before anything happens, when things are normal, other than, the typical things that you go through every day and that we go through as professors or whatever, with zero trust and double authentication and things like that. What are some of the softer things that are preventative as it relates to the ransomware extortion process that you advise clients on beforehand, in terms of how they handle it from a governance point of view, of how they have the lawyers in place, how they work with their insurance companies? What are the softer issues as outside of technology?
Yeah. So one of the big things is cybersecurity insurance. So it's pretty ubiquitous at this point,
Sure.
given how prevalent ransomware has become. Having cybersecurity insurance is an important aspect to this. Not only does it provide you with funding for your incident response, remediation, recovery, ransom payments, all of that, it also helps you gain an understanding of your infrastructure. So they will go through and they'll provide you with questionnaires to help understand the risks that you pose to them. In addition to that, they will have they're called panels, where they're approved vendors for legal services, ransom negotiations, incident response, infrastructure replacement, all of those things. These are vetted organizations that have proven their worth in that particular aspect of an incident response process. And so you get access to all of those without having to go hunt and find them. We've all worked with the different law firms. We've worked with the insurance carriers. We have a well-oiled machine that once we are called into action, we can get moving within the hour. We're collecting data, we're investigating things. I can reach out to a threat actor, begin the negotiation process. Essentially, it takes the burden off of the organization, as their hair is on fire. The last thing you want to do is try and figure all of these things out for yourself. Vet legal law firms, vet incident response providers, vet negotiators. The insurance companies have already done this. So it is the best of the best that you can find provided right to you. All you need to do is make that phone call to your insurance provider. So getting that in place, and even if you don't have cybersecurity insurance or you have minimal insurance, going through the process of identifying the organizations you want to work with ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is do it while your systems are being encrypted, right? That is a very important time that you cannot spend, on these phone calls. And heck, you might not even have access to your phone systems at that point, or email, or whatever it might be. So it's preparation. It's having an incident response plan. It's testing that plan. It's thinking about aspects of, okay, well, how long can we be down? How long can we go on without going bankrupt? I've seen organizations, unfortunately, have to call it quits after one of these events. So preparation is absolutely key. I used to ride motorcycles, and it was the those that have fallen, those that will, right? In cybersecurity, it's those that have been hacked and those that will be. You just have to see it as an eventuality and just prepare for when that happens.
Are there things that common people and technology people do wrong in a breach response setting that magnify the effects, that make it worse for the negotiator? I mean, I do a lot of work on breach response communication, things not related necessarily to the technology people, but to the front desk, to the boardroom, where people are just, it's very easy to see them panic in front of a camera when CNN's there asking about this kind of stuff. Are there things that make your job more difficult, or to the converse, that make your job easier based on that kind of communicative breach response strategy?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One of them is if they start the negotiation on their own ahead of time. So if a organization
who would typically do that?
So if an organization gets hacked and they try to do it in-house, so they'll reach out to the threat actor based on.
No, I'm talking about what would be the job title of someone that would be the natural to reach out?
Oh, typically it's going to be an IT person, because they're
the ones
that would have they'd have the expertise to go on the dark web and communicate in that way.
Talk to them, but not necessarily to negotiate, but actually to communicate.
Right. To actually get the communication lines open. The CFO or somebody is typically not the person you would go to say, like, hey, how do we get on Tor and go talk to these guys and safely, right? But so that's unfortunately when we see a lot of problems, because by the time we're brought in, the cadence of the conversation, could be not to our liking. There could have already been monetary offers made. There may be a timer in place. Many of these groups operate a timer, and while they don't necessarily stick to the timer, real strictly, it can create a sense of urgency after that timer is expired. So we're backpedaling at that point. So that can certainly hurt us. Having a mentality of denial can hurt us. So we advise them that, listen, this sometime might have to come down to you pulling the trigger and paying. And there are a lot of, C-suite individuals who just, they haven't heard no in a long time, and they don't like it.
And for large sums of money in an era where profits are not in surplus in most of these healthcare organizations, especially.
Exactly. So understanding that you may have to pay millions of dollars to this criminal who attacked you, in the cover of night, is a tough pill to swallow. And so waiting until the last second to do these things, it can sometimes create hiccups whereby, okay, well, now you didn't give me the okay to start the settlement process until 6 p.m. on Friday. Okay, well, a lot of these guys, they like to party on the weekend. So, I might now reach out to them and say, hey, we're ready to go. And yet they might not respond for 12 hours or 24 hours, or, they don't care. They have you by the throat and they know it. So that can create some issues sometimes. And, sometimes keeping us in the dark. It does happen where the organization itself, they're just trying to be protective of their information, and they're just not being straightforward with us in regard to, what data is important, what data is at risk, what do they need back. They're just too used to keeping everything kind of secretive, and they're just not really being open with us, which can just hurt our ability to act on their behalf.
Are there people in your business that were just like the white hat people on the cybersecurity business in general, the hackers? Are there people that have sort of come from the evil side to the good guy side to help give advice on how best to handle negotiations like this?
For sure. There are definitely people that have delved into the darker side of things. Sometimes that's why they're the best. They are able to see, some of the darker sides of the internet. They have presence there. They can, observe the communications and the way that these groups work. We all, have presence on a lot of these forums, and we watch, we participate. Some of the forums you can't even get into unless you have status within, I'll call it the industry. So yeah, there are certainly people out there that kind of toe the line, if you will. They're back and forth a little bit. But I'll be honest with you, sometimes it is people from law enforcement and undercover backgrounds that perform best because they understand how to take on a persona. We don't come out and say, "Hey, we're negotiators." Typically, many of these groups have kind of a bad taste in their mouth about professional negotiation firms.
Really?
So we pretend to be a member of the organization, and so taking on that persona and kind of going through the motions, especially if you had hostage negotiation experience in law enforcement, that can benefit you quite well.
So we can't have a webcast like this without bringing up the aspect of artificial intelligence. So can you tell me if there are any of what the relationship is between artificial intelligence now and making your job harder on the bad guy side and maybe easier on the good guy side? Is that fitting in any way and in the coursework that you're teaching your students?
Yeah. So from a worse perspective, phishing is getting easier. So many of these individuals operate in kind of the old Eastern Bloc, Russia, and English is not a strong suit for them. So it's difficult to create a convincing phishing email if you are just working from your limited understanding of, English. However, now with AI, the translations are good. It can create compelling emails for you, things like that. Now we're looking at the kind of the voice replication. So you could almost, set up a voice call for social engineering purposes. So it certainly has aspects there. I wouldn't say it's, writing ransomware for people that's anything sophisticated. Early on in the days of ChatGPT, before they put the guardrails on, people were trying to get it to do those things, and it was just really junky code. It didn't work very well. So there's aspects there for, we call them script kiddies, people that don't really know what they're doing, that just try to, use pre-made stuff.
Script kiddies?
Script kiddies, yeah. It's kind of an old term there, but from the good perspective is that AI is being built into a lot of these technologies that we use to help defend our network. So there's a statistic that organizations keep track of called breakout time. And breakout time is essentially the amount of time it takes from a threat actor to gain initial access to a network to lateral movement within the wider network. If you can spot them during that period before the breakout occurs and stop them, you've mitigated the vast majority of the damage. So AI can help us identify those anomalous behaviors of a particular user, right? If you have someone in accounts receivable that's now running PowerShell scripts and accessing the command line and doing all these things, that isn't something that person normally would be doing. Now, those things that they're doing in the initial stages might not be inherently malicious. So antivirus and some of the endpoint detection and response utilities might not spot it. But implementing AI into this to recognize, okay, this is what John in accounts receivable does day to day. I'm spotting this anomaly. I'm going to alert someone. That can sometimes be the make or break between stopping an ultimately impactful ransomware event and just an intrusion that was a headache.
Are there any other new technologies that you're seeing that are making your job easier or more difficult on the other side?
So I would say, as far as easier, the integration of more of these utilities and technologies. Years ago, think like 2017, 2018, nobody even knew what endpoint detection and response was. And even if they did, it was too expensive to use. More and more organizations are implementing next-gen AV, endpoint detection and response, even better logging, having an awareness of the logging necessary to identify the actions that took place within an environment is quite helpful. And then now the space within our industry that is managed detection and response. So the average organization can't staff a highly elite group of security analysts to monitor the network in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there are organizations out there that will do this for you on a contract basis. And then you have, we call it eyes on glass. You have real people monitoring your network in real time to spot what's happening and then cut it off if it is malicious. So it's the adoption of these technologies that's really the game changer there. You see that many of the organizations, while impacted, maybe aren't as broadly impacted. They've been able to segment the network off or isolate systems while the attack is occurring, and it minimizes the damage. So I would say an awareness by organizations, the implementation of many of the technologies out there, and like I said, kind of the third-party groups that are able to provide these smaller organizations with a really robust group of people and skills to help defend them.
So you're saying that despite all the fanciest technologies, that some of the most effective are people that are like proctors and monitors that are just watching it as a human as opposed to a robot.
I can tell you. So part of my role on our negotiation team was we were also the cyber threat intelligence kind of aggregators. And so I kept statistics on every single case that we worked, and we worked hundreds and hundreds of ransomware cases alone. And every single antivirus, every single endpoint detection response that you could name was bypassed by these groups for one reason or another, whether it be a novel piece of malware, whether it be the endpoint detection response wasn't configured properly, you name it across the board. So relying solely on technology is just never going to be the right way forward. You need the insight and the intelligence of a human being to understand what's happening. The technology is only as good as the definitions that it's updated with, or the rule sets you put in place, or the alerting you put in place. And if there's one, mistake within that, or one thing that's not foreseen, you'll end up with something getting through. And by the time anyone realizes it, it's too late. So yes, I'm wholeheartedly a supporter of, human beings being involved in this process.
It's interesting. It's interesting to see that as it starts to mature, and we're seeing this with doctors in the operating room, that they just say, look, I have 30 years of intuition and I have artificial intelligence, so I trust it to a certain point, but it has to be me. It has to be me, and I'm not going to give it all over to them. I'm sort of curious, just in closing remarks, about workforce issues. I mean, we hear about healthcare every place. I'm sort of curious about the workforce in your business. I mean, you teach at a great university, and I'm wondering how the interest level is from your students to get into this business. I mean, I have a personal example where my daughter went to University of New Hampshire, and she decided she wanted to be a justice studies major because she thought she'd be watching CSI for most of the coursework, and this would be a great way to get through 4 years just by watching television. And then decided she wanted to go in the advertising business when she got out. So what are you seeing in terms of the interest levels, specifically in terms of the work that you're doing? Obviously, cybersecurity is enormous. We get a lot of eyeballs on our content for cybersecurity for obvious reasons. What are you seeing in terms of the interest level getting into this business, and what the career trajectory is for young people that want to get into this?
Yeah, so it certainly is. There's a lot of young people very interested in this, and some of it comes from a place of genuine interest. Some of it comes from a place of, they think they're going to make a ton of money, and you certainly can make a lot of money in this industry if you have the right skill set. But a lot of kids coming into school, they think, oh, I'm going to be a hacker, right? Everybody thinks they're going to be a hacker, and the vast majority aren't going to be hackers. But there is a ton of space for, SOC analysts. So those people with eyes on glass, right? The managed detection and response, incident response investigation. There's a lot of need for highly technical individuals in that. Ransom negotiations itself, there's a very small group of us that do that kind of thing. But there is, even a need for governance, risk, and compliance. People don't even think of that aspect of it. There are enormous parts of like the Big Four and other firms that their entire job all day, every day is to help organizations comply with different regulations to ensure that they have different systems in place to mitigate these risks for a cyber attack. There is so much out there that people can do that's well beyond just being a hacker. That I think it's great that they're getting involved. I think a lot of the students come in with a perception thinking that it's just all going to be cake because that they grew up on computers and they know how they work. It's still very difficult and it's a very specific skill set. But we really have a lot of people that just genuinely enjoy the thrill of the chase. Kind of getting in there and figuring things out. And it's always exciting as a professor to see that student just dig in and ask questions and kind of go for it. So.
Well, your students are just blessed by the fact that they have someone like you that looks at this through a number of different angles. And I'm thankful for having you here today. I think it was just fantastic, extremely fascinating. And I might like to bring you back again for the presentation that you said you do on the top 10. What is it?
Yeah, I have a whole presentation on essentially breaking down the entire process of a ransomware negotiation, risk mitigation during that process, whether it be, for sanctions compliance, for re-extortion propensity, all those types of things. So yeah,
I see a second act coming up here on Health Stealth Radio, or as part of our Chime events. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for your time. Really fascinating, and hope we have a chance to do this again soon. Really, really good.
Thank you, Frank. Love being on.